In the next few months, one thing that will really decide the course of India's relationship with the US is a bilateral trade agreement. In February, this is around the same time when Donald Trump was finalizing a massive set of tariffs on the world, a move he almost completely withdrew later, of course. In that same month, US agreed to finalize this huge deal with India, which will increase the volume of trade between the two countries to $500 billion by 2030 from just $129 billion in 2024, in just 6 years. So, just this Tuesday, officials from the two countries signed terms of reference for the first part of this deal. Remember, the trade value between US and India right now is $129 billion, with India enjoying a trade surplus of $46 billion. So, what do US and India sell to each other? Well, India exports pearls, precious stones and jewelry, textiles, electronic and electrical equipment, pharma products, mineral fuels, oils, and distillation products to the US. America majorly sells crude petroleum, coal briquettes, and gas turbines to India. Now, it wants to sell a lot more cars, pharma and machine equipment, and agricultural products to the country. So, what's the holdup? Well, the current US government accuses India, like it accuses a lot of other countries, of having set up huge trade barriers. That includes high tariffs on imported cars and machines, and many non-tariff barriers like a disregard for US certification on various other products like pharma equipment. A US government document which details trade barriers that the US faces from 60 countries around the world says that India's average tariff as a most favored nation on the US is 17%. That, according to the US, is the highest among major economies. It says US agricultural goods face an average tariff of 39% when exported to India. It says India has raised tariffs on more than 70 product categories in 2019-20 and 31 more in 2020-2021. In that document, the US has accused India of often hiking tariffs without notice or without public consultation. Plus, I spoke of non-tariff barriers. These include import bans, licensing requirements, quota systems, import restrictions, tough licensing norms, and the Indian government's strict data protection and localization rules. Meanwhile, US policy flip-flops on tariffs continue to create confusion. After levying a uniform 10% baseline tariff on India and other countries, the US recently exempted all electronic goods from those tariffs, including on China, which has been levied a reciprocal tariff of 125%. In fact, according to latest updates from the US government, overall, China faces as much as a 245% tariffs on imports to the US. In this episode, we talk about what a trade agreement between the US and India could look like and how it could change not just the geo-economic relationship between the two countries, but also potentially the world trade order, especially China's dominant position in that order. Listen on. It's Friday, the 18th of April. I'm your host, Anirban Chowdhury. This is The Morning Brief. My guest today is Bipin Sapra, tax partner and global trade expert at EY India. Hi Bipin, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief. So glad you could make time.
Morning, Anirban. It's a pleasure to be here on your show.
Right, the pleasure is absolutely mine, Bipin. Let's start with the basics. Can you give me 3 reasons why you think the trade deal is so critical?
The current trade with US is nearly 18% of the India's export basket.
Right.
That gets at risk the moment the tariffs are imposed, because depending upon the commodity, there are preferential benefits which each country enjoys. And as the product gets costlier in US because of these tariffs, there'll be a shrinking of the market, and Indian exporters would suffer from sending these products to there, because ultimately it's the demand supply curve which really dictates the whole supply of goods from India. So that's the first one. In turn, the entire Indian manufacturing ecosystem gets vitiated, because as tariffs go up, as there is an impact on the exported goods out there, the market shrinks, the investment which was coming in, the manufacturing which had got boosted because of various mechanisms of Make in India, which the Indian government had taken, they all go on the back burner. There is a dip in the Indian manufacturing scenario if the tariffs, and if one of the biggest markets for the Indian goods really gets small and shrunk. And finally, I feel US is one of the biggest suppliers of FDI to India. And the whole impact of the trade getting impacted, the environment will not be conducive to fresh investments coming to India. And accordingly, I think there would be a setback which would happen. So these are the three main concerns which I have when it comes to the US India trade deal.
And Bipin, this is obviously more consequential in light of US's perception of India as this tariff king and a country with the highest average MFN tariffs among major economies, among other things, right?
Absolutely. Given that if that perception is the basis of any lawmaking or any tariff which is being imposed, then it's equally difficult for India to get into a deal which would be beneficial to India. So you're absolutely right there.
Do you think our tariffs are too high on the US?
I think the MFN tariff which India has, the standard rate is 10%. We, like most countries, have a deviation. And you have to realize that India is not a developed economy. India is still a developing economy, trying to get into a manufacturing sector, trying to build its manufacturing sector, at least to supply to India. And hence, there might be certain places where the tariffs may be higher than other countries. So each country has high tariffs, but India, in certain cases, in very specific industries, may have imposed higher tariffs to protect that market. And hence, for those sectors, the tariffs might be higher. But on a general level, Indian tariffs are, I think, in accordance with what we see in the developing countries across the world.
Let's talk about impact of the planned trade pact. Apart from a thawing of trade relations between the partners, which is US and India, it would also bring about a change in the global trading order, right? Do you think the agreement could be a strategic counterweight to China's dominance in global supply chains?
I think the way the tariff application has panned out, and the edge which India is enjoying currently with the US deal makers, I think India is in a better position to get a BTA sign on some terms, at least if not all of them, which are very beneficial to the Indian industry. Once that happens, and assuming that the tariff on the Chinese goods continues, India can be in a position to replace China in a number of markets, including US. And hence, I am absolutely sure that this might be the harbinger of change of the trading order in the world. There would be other implications which would happen. China would obviously want to dominate, if not US, but other markets. And we would see, if not exactly a trade war, but a trade competition being played out in the global markets. But then I think India would have captured one of the biggest markets, which is the US, when it comes to products where China holds the dominance today.
Bipin, tell me, what sectors are likely to be prioritized in the trade deal, and how will they impact domestic industries in both countries?
So over the weekend, we saw electronics, smartphones, and related products coming in the
Exempted.
limelight. They
Right.
were exempted by US, and they were exempted from everywhere. Now, that was one area we were going to have a huge edge, especially with a fully functional manufacturing facility of iPhones and other mobile phones in India. And any competition with China would have been great. I still feel electronics is going to be an interesting chapter when it is and how it is played out, given the
Hmm.
market and the constraints which both these countries have. See, you have to realize that US is aggressive to sell agricultural products. It is interested in selling dairy products. There are defense, aerospace, engineering goods, chemicals. So a number of those medical equipment, and obviously, how can I forget automobiles? US has been asking for concessions
Right.
for fully built automobile imports.
Hmm.
And it has already levied a reciprocal tariff of 25%, had levied even before the current set of reciprocal tariffs came in. So that's going to be a big part of the agenda. And given the sensitivities within the Indian manufacturers, the primary manufacturer of these automobiles in India, especially the EVs, there is going to be a lot of concern when it comes to this. So, this is going to be a critical product when it comes to deal making. While India is very aggressive on textiles, pharmaceuticals, metals, toys, chemicals, processed food, paper and packaging, and obviously engineering goods and electronics. So, pharmaceuticals is one area which has been exempted, and that one we have to realize that whatever anybody may say, US is dependent on Indian pharmaceuticals, at least the API medicines. Those form almost the 40% of the medicines which are being imported, and they are absolutely critical for the US market.
Right. Another tricky area, I think, is textiles. The earlier threat of high tariffs, in fact, would have annihilated a lot of small textile businesses in India. Now, a trade agreement will also have consequences. How do you see this? And let's also talk about other products like food, chemicals, and oil and gas.
Textiles is a huge export to US, and that will be one area which India would have to push when it comes to negotiating the deal. Similarly, there are other products like engineering goods, paper and packaging, processed foods, leather, chemicals, which are key elements of the Indian export basket, where India may not hold competitive advantage and may not be the importer of choice in US. These products, these would be very critical for India when it comes to the deal negotiation. Oil and gas, I think, should be a no-brainer. India has already started importing higher from US, and that would help bridge the trade gap between India and US. Dairy products, agricultural products, which the US has been pushing, like alfalfa grass, dairy products, and some other things where there are sensitivities in terms of the products being used, the animal products which are being used. So, all of those would be key concerns which would be there. And
Right.
so these would be important when the BTA finally gets thrashed out between India and US.
Right, right, understood. Now, the US has also spoken about non tariff barriers, right? For example, the fact that India refuses US lab certifications on certain products like chemicals, ICT, and telecom equipment. How do you see this?
I think whatever US perceives as a non-tariff barrier are going to be part of the discussion whenever the BTA gets discussed. Whatever mandates India has on telecom and other products has been an irritant in not only US and India trade, but those have been put in place as a safeguard from security purposes, given that these telecom equipments are prone to misuse, and hence India has been very careful in putting in certain norms, but ultimately they do fall under the category of non-tariff barriers, and I'm quite confident that these will come in for discussions when the India and US discuss the BTA.
Right. Just one last question on sectors. If we come to services and especially tech services, the recent norms, India's stress on data localization, its strictures on cross-border flows, will they be deal breakers, you think, or will they be breakthrough points?
I don't think these would be deal breakers. I think India has moved forward in terms of whatever benefits it can give to various countries and especially US. It's doing away of the equalization levy or the Google tax as it was known as is a clear signal that India is wanting to open its market. Any other non-tariff barrier or tariff barrier which is there in the light of digital protection can be evaluated for its removal. India may have concerns from some countries like China and some other countries. But with US, there might be a willingness to open up these constraints. And we may see this being part of the bilateral agreement. And India may accept on case to case basis whatever things are there from the US side in relation to the tech world in terms of Data Protection Act and whatever international concerns may be there, duties on cross-border digital e-commerce and data transfers. So all of these, I think, can be negotiated. They have been there for a long time, and India would be open to considering them, given there is a bigger pie of international trade which is at stake.
Understood. Now, one huge angle to this is the WTO and how Trump has been trying to sort of sideline the WTO in what he envisages to be a new world order or a new trade order for the world. Now, could a bilateral agreement like this, will it sideline or complement what is clearly WTO-led multilateralism in today's world?
See, by going in for reciprocal tariffs, the US government has sidelined the WTO to a great extent. What it means is that each country has to perform vis-a-vis US when it comes to how they are taxing US or how US perceives those taxes vis-a-vis their own needs and requirements. And what that means is the solution only lies in having a bilateral trade agreement. And any bilateral agreement which happens, and we have seen more and more bilateral agreements being signed, whether it's between India and various countries, including UAE, Australia, and now as we debate with EU, UK, this is something which the world order is moving to, which is the bilateral agreement.
Understood. Right. Bipin, another offshoot of the US-India trade deal is that it would bring India closer to what is called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. What is the IPEF and how could it become critical to this story?
So I don't know how many people know about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. It all began in May 2022 when the United States launched this framework with Australia, Brunei, the Darussalam. So basically Pacific countries like Fiji, then India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam as part of it.
Right.
What you have to realize from the choice of countries is that it almost represents 40% of the global GDP and almost 28% of global goods and services trade. That's huge. If these countries can come together and create a trading bloc or become trading partners, I think there are a lot of synergies to be looked at and a lot of benefits which could be really obtained. And the purpose, again, is for trade, for supply chains, for clean energy decarbonization, and tax and anti-corruption. So these are exactly the items which we are now talking about. So, yeah, I think IPF is an hope which everybody can look forward to. And if it becomes a reality in its true sense, then everybody, including India and US, has to gain.
And would the deal pave the way for India to eventually join the IPEF trade pillar more formally?
I think once the India-US BTA actually gets signed, India and US would be strategic partners in trade. So if US feels and if India also accordingly agrees that this would be for the benefit of the overall trade relationship, I think India will step in and increase its trading partners because most of these players, India currently already holds a bilateral trade agreement. It's either with Japan or with Korea
Right.
or with the ASEAN countries or Australia. At various levels, various forms, there are trade agreements which are in place. So India is part of this bloc already. And with US signing this deal, I think India would be totally ensconced in this trade zone.
Right. Finally, Vipin, the next few months are going to be a period of massively intense negotiations. What are the two or three pitfalls that India should avoid?
It's a difficult question. It would depend upon what are India's priorities and what are US priorities. It's the services which India has to be careful of, and US also would be careful about if at all the discussion goes there.
Right.
But more importantly, my worry is that given that once we give a certain benefit to India, US and UK would be looking at similar benefits coming their way when we get down to negotiate with them in the next round for closing the FTAs with them. It's going to be an interesting 6 to 8 months when India not only closes US but also negotiates with the EU and UK to close their agreements. If all of these
Right.
can be really close to the level of a decent level of Indian satisfaction, I think we are going to have a good run from the Indian trade perspective in the next few years.
Bipin, thank you so much for your insights and for joining us on the morning brief.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Anirban.
That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on the Morning Brief. It was produced by me and Rajas Naik, sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. A new episode of the Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Keep listening and have a good weekend.